Bhadram Karnebhi Shrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyemakshabhiryajatraha Sthirairangehi Tushtuvam Sastanubhihi Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuh Sustina Indro Vruddhasravaha Sustina Pusha Vishvedaha Sustina Starkshu Arishtanemihi Sustino Brihasphadir Dadhadu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O the Supreme Reality, may we hear with our ears what is auspicious. May we see with our eyes what is auspicious. May we, while offering our praise to the Almighty Reality, with our bodies strong of limbs, enjoy the life which God is pleased to grant us. May Indra of great fame be well disposed towards us. May the all-knowing and immensely wealthy Pusha be propitious to us. May Garuda, the vanquisher of miseries, be well pleased with us. May Brihaspati grant us all prosperity. Om peace, peace, peace. Now today we are going to start the third chapter, third prakarana, which deals with the philosophy of non-dualism or Advaita. Before beginning, I shall give a brief outline of the structure of the book, which I have already done earlier, just as a kind of a reminder. The text contains 215 verses. It is a commentary in metrical form in verses on the Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, which has got only 12 verses, 12 mantras. The text proper, Mandukya Upanishad, is very ancient, at least 5,000 or 6,000 years old. But the Karika was written around 7th century or 6th century AD. In this, the Karika is the commentary. Any interpretation on a philosophical text written in verses is called a Karika. Now, it has got 4 chapters. Chapter is called Prakaranam in the context of this book. The first chapter is a commentary on the metaphysical implications of the 12 mantras which constitute the Upanishad, the central work. So it is called Agama Prakaranam. Agama actually means Vedas, the fundamental text. So it expounds the philosophy of Advaita on the basis of the doctrine of non-origination, which is technically called Ajadivada or Ajadavada in Vedanta. The theory is this: the reality is one, that is Brahman, which is the immanent principle, the omnipresent principle, and also the transcendental principle, which has no beginning, no birth, and no end, no death, which is eternal, everlasting, which is experienced the same reality in all the 3 states of our experience, namely in waking states, in dream state, and also in deep sleep state. This is expounded in the first Karika, first chapter of Gaudapada's work. In the second chapter, Gaudapada expounds this idea on the basis of pure reasoning or logic, because he had to confront many thinkers, many metaphysical schools of his time, who did not believe in the authenticity of revealed scriptures, the Upanishads, Vedas or anything. They were trying to prove their doctrine on the basis of relentless, uncompromising logic and reasoning. So Gaudapada tried to establish his doctrine. What is the doctrine? The doctrine is this: the reality is one, it is impersonal, it is attributeless. Attributeless or impersonal have got a special implication. That point should be understood very clearly. Because in Advaita Vedanta or in non-dualistic philosophy, the reality is said to be impersonal or attributeless. It's not that it is not capable of expressing as persons or through attributes. It means it goes beyond all attributes and beyond all personality. That's the idea behind. God or the absolute reality can manifest in association with attributes, in association with names and forms, but names and forms and attributes do not exhaust the absolute reality, which is far beyond all this. That idea is implied here. That should be understood very clearly. And this is a basic problem for many students of comparative philosophy in understanding the true implication of non-dualistic system. Sometimes we may misunderstand that Advaita or non-dualistic philosophy denies or rejects the possibility of personification or the possibility of any association with attributes. The fact should be understood that the implication is that the absolute reality goes beyond, it transcends any limitations in the form of name, form, verbalization, definition, description or anything. It goes far beyond and it transcends all limitations. Transcending is different from being in conflict with. See, what transcends attributes and personalization can manifest with attributes, of course. So it is not in conflict with attributes, rather it goes beyond attributes. That point should be understood. Very often you find terms like Trigunatita, Gunatita in Sanskrit means going beyond attributes, beyond gunas, beyond characteristics. That's a real implication. Not that it's devoid of attributes or devoid of characteristics. But in Sanskrit language, this problem is there, See, guna atita, actually atita means transcending. But very often it is translated as devoid of gunas, attributes. Actually it goes beyond, it doesn't go contrary to it. That point should be understood. Now, in the second chapter, Gaudapada asserted his doctrine that the reality is attributeless, impersonal, formless, immanent, omnipresent, and transcendental. And then, but all these ideas were expressed in a language based on logic and reasoning and not on theological convictions or beliefs. In the third chapter, Gaudapada is planning to establish another important, rather the central position of Vedanta philosophy, Advaita philosophy. That is this: the reality is one. But what about the experience of the plurality, the multiplicity, the names and forms, the diversity that we interact with, that we experience in our day-to-day existence? How do we explain the experience of the relative, the experience of the plurality, the multiplicity, the common sense experience that we have in our everyday life? That point is explained. The central position is this: the world has not come into existence. Non-origination of the universe. The reality is Brahman. Generally, there are different doctrines with regard to creation of this world. Of course, I am not here dealing with the academic disciplines of creationism or evolutionism. That's not what I am dealing with right now. There are different doctrines and theories of creation in Vedantic tradition. Not only in Vedantic tradition, in other schools of thought, in non-Vedantic schools of thought also, there have been different theories of creation, emergence of this diverse universe. The theistic schools like the Sankhyas, the Yogas, the Mimamsakas, the Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and also Vedantins, all of them have their own doctrines, their own theories with regard to creation. And also the non-orthodox schools of thought, like the four schools of Buddhism, the doctrine of emptiness, that is Shunyavada, then the subjective idealism, that is Vijnanavada. These are two idealistic schools of Buddhism. Then the Sautrantika, the realistic school, which believes in the reality of external empirical objects. And also the Vaibhashika, who are also realists, who believe in the existence of external objects. So all of them have their own respective approaches and theories of creation. And apart from this, there are the two main broad schools: the school of creationism, based on the biblical monotheistic theology of the three Abrahamic religions, and also popular Hindu and Eastern tradition, because there are many non-Vedantic, non-Advaitic schools of thought in ancient India. They also had their own different schools of different creationistic schools. Then also there is the evolutionistic schools of modern scientists and atheists and rationalists. I am not going to deal with them. What Gaudapada implies is this. He says, the reality can never give birth to anything. Brahman or Atman, the impersonal, the attributeless, the immanent, and the transcendental, the omnipresent reality, can never be the cause of anything in this world, can never be the cause of this universe. Because if you admit that the absolute reality is the cause of something, and this world is the effect, then you are limiting the absolute reality to the doctrine of causality. It is a cause. So Brahman is not the final cause. Why? Because there is no effect. The world that we experience itself is in reality Brahman. You are looking at the absolute reality through the prism of time, space, and causation, and you perceive this universe. A liberated soul, when looking at this very universe without the association of time, space, and causation, then he will be perceiving only the Brahman. So Brahman perceived, the absolute reality perceived through the prism of time, space, and causation, which constitute relativity, is this universe. The universe perceived without association of relativity is the absolute reality, Brahman. That's all. Now, what does it mean? It means this world as a separate entity has not come into existence. So we are all Brahman even if we do not realize that truth. We are all the supreme consciousness. Even if we do not realize that truth. The fact that we are the supreme consciousness does not depend upon our realization of that reality. Even if you do not realize that supreme truth, we are the absolute reality. So, all spiritual practices are meant only to remove the wrong notion that we are not Brahman. It's not meant for creating the right notion that we are Brahman. Rather, it is meant for removing the wrong notion that we are not Brahman. That's a point to be understood in Vedanta. Because the reality doesn't depend upon any kind of objectification. It is our intuitive experience. What we are in reality is what our real Swarupa is called in Sanskrit. Our true nature is not dependent upon our understanding our true nature. It is a reality. Then what is the purpose of all these readings, scriptures, discussion? To remove the wrong notions, the wrong ideas that we normally entertain. Why? Because if the fact that we are the supreme reality is dependent upon our realization, then that reality cannot be absolute, because it is created by a process, realization. It is an act, objectification of something which is called knowledge. So this is to be understood. That point is clearly established in the first mantra, the first sloka of third chapter. Now, if you read, we'll understand this. Upasana siddho dharmo jade brahmani vartade pragutpattehi ajam sarvam tenasu kripanasmrtaha. This is the first mantra. The prosoder is this. Upasana siddha dharmaha jate brahmani vartade utpattehi prag sarvam ajam tena asau kripanaha. It is smrtaha. This is of course, this is for those who are really want to study. Now, the word dharma here doesn't mean dharma as understood in Buddhistic or Vedantic or Hindu tradition. Here, dharma actually means jiva, the individual soul. The individual soul, that is jiva. That will be explained, the idea becomes more clear in the second verse. Now, there are some people who believe that in the beginning we were all perfect. And now we are in a state of imperfection. Gradually we will go back to the state of perfection. This is the normal belief. You can find this idea in many monotheistic religions, in non-Vedantic traditions of Hindu religious culture also, and also in Abrahamic religions, and many of the religions which have got a strong theological background, you can get this idea. That's very common, that is very universal. The idea is this. We are now in a state of imperfection. We are coming from a state of perfection. Then we had a deviation. In the biblical theology, we call it, the expulsion of the archangel, or Adam eating the fruit of knowledge, which was a fall. And the Augustinian concept of original sin, the entire humanity inheriting the original sin, which actually was the effect of something wrong which Adam did, Adam eating the apple. and then the place of God's grace, which is the only path for liberation or salvation, working through the intermediacy of Jesus. All these ideas are classical examples of this doctrine of our present state of imperfection, our original state of perfection from where we had a deviation, and our returning to the state of perfection, liberation, salvation, whatever you may call it. This is found in many religious traditions, in many non-Advaitic, non-Vedantic religious traditions of India. Also you find such ideas. Now, according to them, we are now engaged in spiritual practices. As a result of this spiritual practice, we will get back to our original perfect state of perfection, which we lost. This is the idea. Now, Gaudapada says, from the standpoint of the highest non-dualistic philosophy, this doctrine doesn't stand. Because if you believe that your salvation or your liberation is the fruit, the effect of your efforts, then you have to admit your efforts or your spiritual practices constitute the cause and salvation is the effect. So salvation is something dependent upon the cause, which is your own spiritual practices. Just as a farmer works hard in the field, or a factory worker works hard in a factory, he produces an effect in the form of manufactured goods. Or the farmer cultivating grains, producing grains, food grains. Similarly, through spiritual practices, we are producing spiritual elevation, spiritual enlightenment. So it becomes the effect. Now Gaudapada says here is a logical flaw. Why? If something is the effect of something else, then that effect cannot be eternal. What is produced will be lost. Why? Because there was a state when it did not exist. It exists for some time. It comes into existence. So there will be a state when it would not exist. So a salvation or liberation which is the result of human efforts cannot be eternal. Therefore, Gaudapada says, there are people who believe the liberation or spiritual unfoldment, enlightenment, is the result of your sincere effort. Augustine doesn't accept. Augustine says, God's grace is supreme. Human effort has not much value because your inherited sin can be purged off only by God's grace through the intermediacy of Jesus. So in Vedanta, you see the approach is different. Vedanta, the state of liberation goes far beyond anything in the form of an effect of a cause. So Gaudapada says, liberation is already there. You are not aware of it. You open your eyes and you will realize you are Brahman, you are the infinite, you are the absolute reality, you are the all-pervading reality, you are the supreme consciousness, supreme existence, supreme bliss. You are not aware of it. What is required is we must open our inner eyes, intuitive experience. For this intuitive experience cannot be and will not be produced. It is not a result of any kind of effort. But there is something which is responsible for our being unaware of it, for our being ignorant of our true nature. That should be removed. As I said earlier, the old example, the half-lit room, the rope lying there, you bring light, and suddenly you realize it is a piece of rope, but in the semi-darkness, you mistook the piece of rope to be a snake. When you bring light, you do not produce the rope, you only remove the darkness, which was responsible for the wrong notion that it was a snake. That's the only point to be understood. So Gaudapada says, people who believe that they can practice spiritual sadhana, and as a result of their spiritual practices, they can reach the highest spiritual enlightenment, they are wrong. Don't misunderstand. This point should be clearly understood. What Gaudapada implies is this: the spiritual enlightenment, the fact that we are Brahman, we are the Supreme Consciousness, is not the effect of our effort. If it becomes the effect of an effort or a work, then it becomes perishable. A farmer producing food grains in the field, or a factory worker producing manufactured goods. Similarly, a spiritual aspirant practices spiritual practices. He undergoes spiritual practices and then he creates or manufactures spiritual enlightenment. It is not so, because it becomes perishable. So, what is the implication? What is the relevance of all spiritual practices? All the spiritual practices are meant for only one purpose: to remove ignorance, to remove darkness, which is the obstacle in our way of realizing what we actually are. So spiritual practices are necessary. Discussions are necessary. Vedantic lectures are essential. But we have to remember, they are necessary for only removing the wrong notions that we have in our mind. The technical point, the subtle point in Vedanta, that should be understood very, very clearly. So here Gaudapada says, the reality is not a result of our realizing the reality. The reality will be the same even if we do not realize it. In other words, the fact that we are the Supreme Consciousness will be all right even if we are not able to realize it, because the fact that we are Brahman, we are Supreme Consciousness, does not depend upon our realizing it. Rather, it is self-revealed. All spiritual practices are necessary to remove the wrong notion that we are the Supreme Consciousness. That's why for a spiritually elevated soul, even a single hearing is enough to understand what we actually are. There are two famous, well-known doctrines in Vedic tradition related to this. Technically, it is called Prasankhyanavada and Shabda Aparokshvada. I shall explain this, but these technical terms are very important. Otherwise, if you are going to read any book, you won't understand. One view is Prasankhyanavada, which you will understand. The idea is this. Suppose you are a spiritual seeker. You listen to lectures, you read books, you discuss, and you have long, intimate conversation with a learned person, an enlightened person. So you are convinced that you are not this perishable human body and this changing mind or the fluctuating intellect. You feel convinced that we are something far beyond the psychophysical mechanism. You are fully convinced at the intellectual level. But that is not enough. You should go on practicing on this. You should go on meditating, contemplating seriously with great concentration. You should keep contemplating on this supreme truth, that we are not these perishable human bodies, but we are the imperishable, the universal, the immanent, the omnipresent, transcendental reality. You should go on meditating. This meditation, this contemplation, this intense concentration will help us to remove all the negative thought currents from our mind, and gradually, in course of time, it becomes an experience, a fact that you realize as a reality in our day-to-day existence. This is the first approach, which is called prasankhyanavada. Prasankhyanavada means meditation on the meaning of these scriptural statements. So first you should read or listen to these ideas, discuss, contemplate, and strongly register these ideas in the mind, so that these great spiritual truths, at least as intellectual ideas, become a part of your nature. This is one approach. Now, this approach is recommended for those spiritual seekers who do not belong to the highest category. You have got people who have got conflicting ideas, lot of fluctuations, lot of confusions, should work very hard reading these ideas, listening to these ideas, and intensely contemplating. If not in this life, next life it will produce the result. It will drive away all conflicts and confusions from the mind, and we become calm and quiet because we intellectually are convinced that we are the supreme consciousness. Now, this is one. The second approach is different. In the second approach, the moment you hear, it becomes an experience to you. See, I can give an example. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, Sri Ramakrishna was the teacher of Swamiji, the guru of Swami Vivekananda. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, there is an episode. He was deeply contemplative. He was always in a meditative mood, always in a God-intoxicated mood, in a state of divine ecstasy, right from his early childhood. His mind was always merged on the divine, on the transcendental reality. So, when he was staying in Dakshineshwar, his Advaita teacher came, the Totapuri. He was a great monk who underwent spiritual practices on the banks of a river, Narmada river, for almost 4 decades. And as a result of intense study, intense concentration, and intense meditation, he realized the supreme truth. It became an experience to him. But Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, on the other hand, right from his early childhood, had experienced this divine ecstasy as a natural characteristic of his personality. He did not have to struggle at all. Now, Totapuri came to Dakshineshwar, where Sri Ramakrishna was staying, and he taught Advaita Vedanta to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. The moment Totapuri uttered the Upanishad mantra, Tattwamasi, it's Upadesha Vakya. Tattva means you are that supreme consciousness. So, you are that means. The moment the Guru uttered this mantra, on the very moment, Sri Ramakrishna experienced it, and he went into Samadhi and remained in that state for 3 days. So Totapuri, the great Advaitic teacher, was surprised. What it took 40 years, nearly 40 years for him, his only disciple attained in a moment. Now, this experience can only be explained in terms of The other approach is called Shabda Aparokshvada, which literally means the moment you hear the sound, or you read in a book, or you happen to contemplate on the supreme idea, this reality becomes a fact of experience to you. You don't have to meditate. You don't have to undergo a lot of spiritual sadhanas. The example is this. Well, suppose you lost something very precious. See, and your survival depends upon recovering that object which you lost somewhere on the way while walking in the street. You will be very much anxious, and you won't rest for a moment. You will be in a state of complete restlessness till you recover that. Or somebody losing passport or visa, that's the most classic example, will be intelligible to modern audience. It's very important. Then immediately you will go back to the place where you walked, and your mind will be intensely focused on that object. Everything, your whole mind will take the form of that object which you are trying to recover, and you will be going in search of it. And then suppose you are walking, you find it lying on the street. You won't mistake it for anything else. The moment you see it, you will recognize it and you will take it. You won't go on discussing or speculating or contemplating on whether the object lying on the street is the one which I am looking for. No, you won't lose one split movement. Immediately, the moment your eyes are focused on that object, your mind is focused on that object, immediately you go and rush and get it back. Why? Because your whole mind, all your senses of perception are focused on that object, because on recovery of that object depends your whole existence, your survival. So you won't be confused. You won't have a second thought when you see that object lying right in front of you. Now, a spiritual seeker who has already undergone a lot of spiritual sadhanas, he has undergone a lot of spiritual practices, and his mind is always in a state of divine ecstasy, who doesn't think at all about the world or its problems. They may be thinking, but they won't affect his mind. They won't give him any worry at all. He has already reached the highest level of spiritual fitness. For such a person, even listening once will be enough for experiencing the truth of the Vedic statement, the Upanishadic statement, or what of the great statement that he is hearing. You are the Supreme Consciousness. The statement will be enough for him to be transported to a state of real experience. These two approaches are mentioned in the Vedantic schools. One school holds the view, it's called Prasankhyanavada, which says that you have to meditate on the meaning of the statements and discuss, and gradually, in course of time, you will realize it. This school was held by Vajaspati Misra, who was a great commentator on Brahma Sutra called Bhamati, and then the author of Brahma Siddhi is called Mandana, and others. The other school, which Shabda Aparokshvada, which means the moment you listen, it becomes an experience to you. This view was held by the great disciple of Shankaracharya, is called Sureshwara, who has written the grandest and the largest Vedantic technical work. It's a commentary, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam, it is called. Both these approaches are found in Shankaracharya's commentaries. So after Shankaracharya's passing away, different commentators, different great Vedantic philosophers evolved their own approaches, and they developed their own doctrines. But the genesis, the nucleus of all these ideas are found in the original commentaries of Shankaracharya. So that idea is implied in the first verse. So what the author Gaudapada says is this: those who believe that spiritual experience is just the effect of human efforts do not realize the fact that spiritual experience is not the effect of anything. It is a self-revealed fact. We are already the supreme consciousness, even when we are not aware of it. The fact that we are the supreme reality does not depend upon our being aware of it. All the efforts, all the discussions are essential and necessary to remove the darkness of ignorance, the wrong ideas that we have got. And once the truth is revealed, it is revealed as a self-realized fact. Now this is the implication of the first mantra. Then, so I think I have already explained at the very beginning the relevance and the context of the third chapter. Now we'll come to the second verse of the third chapter. That is just a statement, it's a kind of premise. Ato vakshyami akarpanyam ajadi samatam gatam yathana jayade kinjit jayamanam samantatah. Now here Gaudapada says, again for split for prose order, ataha ajati samatam gatam akarpanyam vakshyami yatha samantatah jayamanam kinchit na jayate tatha srunu. That's the idea behind. Now why do we think that we are born, that we are working, and as a result of our efforts only we realize the supreme truth? Why do we mistake this way? Why do we live under this wrong notion, this illusion? That idea is discussed here. The reality is, as I said earlier, I have already explained in great detail the implication of the second statement. I already included there. You have to remember one point. On the one hand, we have the universal belief which is common in all monotheistic religious traditions, including all non-Vedantic, non-Advaitic religious traditions. This wrong notion is this: we are coming from perfection. Somehow we had a deviation, we had a fall, and now we are going back towards perfection, salvation. And this state between perfection at the beginning, perfection at the end, is called existence. Gaudapada says this is absolutely wrong, because we are already Brahman even when we are not aware of it. So the result of all spiritual practices is the removal of the wrong notions and not the creation of the right notion. Because, as I said in the analogy, the moment you bring light to the room, then darkness goes away, and the moment darkness is removed, then you realize that this is a piece of rope. Similarly, when the wrong notion that we are these psychophysical mechanisms is removed completely, then what is the right notion? The right notion is that we are the supreme consciousness. This is not a knowledge. It's not a knowledge. It is in fact an inner experience which cannot be explained. And all the scriptures repeatedly tell us this experience is the ultimate goal of human existence and the ultimate theme of all Upanishadic philosophical works. And all these works are necessary. They are only tools for removing the wrong notion. Now we come to the third important verse. This is philosophically very important. There's Atma hi akashavad jivaihi khadakasherivoditaha khadadivaccha sankhadehi jato edat nidarshanam. This is a famous verse. In fact, it deals with a number of schools of thought and approaches in Vedantic tradition. So, the idea is this. This Atma here means self. This reality, Atman. It is sometimes explained as existing in the form of these embodied beings, jivas. Just as the infinite space is said to be confined within a pot or a jar. Similarly, it is said to be existing as the aggregate of all human bodies, even as ether exists like jars, etc. This is the illustration with regard to birth. Here again, I should explain a few important doctrines in Vedanta. In Vedanta and Advaitic tradition, the relationship between the embodied human beings and the universal reality is explained with the help of three classic illustrations. And these illustrations have given birth to three schools of thought in Advaita Vedanta or non-dualistic school. First one is this. If you listen very carefully, it's easy to understand. Think of the space. Now, the space is all-pervading, omnipresent. And think of a pot that you keep on this floor. There is a space within the pot. And pot is called in Sanskrit ghata. So there is space confined within the jar, the pot or jar. And there is space outside the jar. Now, if you really believe that this jar is a permanent reality, then you would think the space outside the jar is quite big, vast, all-pervading, and the space inside the jar is different. It is confined to the small jar made of clay. But really, there is no distinction. If you break the jar, then you find the space which you thought was confined to the jar is not different from the space outside. The space outside is called Mahakasha, means the great space, the all-pervading space, universal in dimension. And the space within the jar is called Ghatakasha, means a space confined, limited to the jar. Now, this human body, mind, intellect, all these limiting adjuncts or limitations. If you think that this body is permanent, and this name is permanent, this mind is permanent, it's like thinking that this jar is permanent. Before the jar was manufactured, produced, the space within the jar was one with the space outside. And once it is broken, then also the space within the jar will go back to the universal space. Then what is the position, the status of reality, the ontological status of reality of the space within the jar? It is only an illusion. Because the jar is made of clay, it could be broken, And then you understand it is only a temporary phenomenon. It is not permanent. Similarly, all the different individual embodied beings in this world are like jars, pots, pans, glasses, etc., made of clay. Within the space, within the jar, when we think of the space confined to the jar, we may think, oh, the space within the jar is different from the space outside. But really it is not so. If through Indian spiritual practice, by concentration, by meditation, we come to the strong conviction and then experience that we are not these physical bodies. We are the universal consciousness. The moment that realization becomes an experience to you, that very moment, this jar is broken. Then we feel we are one with the entire creation. We are one with the entire universal spirit. I can give an example how it works. When Swami Vivekananda gave his talk in Chicago, you see, find the Sisters and Brothers of America, and that's how he began his speech. If you read Dr. Barrow's Proceedings of the Parliament of Religion 1893, volume 2 volumes, you find there have been great orators and speakers who gave long, bombastic speeches, and they used much more and much more beautiful and sweeter expressions while addressing the audience. But they didn't feel much about it. Sisters and Brothers of America was the term Swamiji used. But many other speakers used much more sweet and honey words. But the audience didn't feel very much. When Vivekananda used this expression, Sisters and Brothers of America, immediately all the nearly 6,000 or around that number of the audience, of these people, listeners, they suddenly felt, here is a person who really means what he says. That's why they stood up and clapped their hands. It was not a response to the oratorical mastery alone. It was a response to the inner experience of the unity of the individual with the universal spirit, which Vivekananda expressed through his words, which immediately reflected, echoed in the minds of the listeners. Otherwise, if you read the different speeches published in the writings, the Proceedings of the Parliament of Religions 1893 as part of the Columbian Exposition, there are very long speeches by established orators of that age who used very sweet expressions, but they didn't feel very much moved by those expressions. When Vivekananda used this expression, Sisters and Brothers of America, because the experience which Swamiji felt within him transmitted to the audience, and they responded naturally. So, you can find anybody who feels that he is not just this body or psychophysical mechanism, but he is one with the universal spirit, feels the unity of the microcosm with the macrocosm. The universal oneness becomes a matter of inner experience. So this is one school of thought in Vedanta. The relationship between the individual embodied beings and the universal reality is explained in terms of the relationship between the space confined to a jar and the space outside. Ghadakasha and Mahakasha. Mahakasha is the universal space, Ghadakasha is the space within the jar. So this is one approach. This approach, this explanation of the relationship between the individual jivas, individual embodied beings, and the universal spirit was used by a great commentator on Shankaracharya's commentary, super commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary on Brahma Sutra. It's called Vajaspati Misra. I already mentioned his name earlier. So that particular school is known as Avachedavada. Avacheda means division, antakarana means the universal space having entered the jar. Similarly, we are within us, just like the space confined to the jar. The jar is impermanent. It is transitory. The moment we realize that we are beyond the psychophysical mechanism, we are breaking the jar, coming out of it, and we are experiencing the inner unity with the universal spirit. The unity between the microcosm and macrocosm is established here. So now I shall stop within a few minutes. If you have got anything to be clarified, we have got about 5 minutes. We can, otherwise we will conclude now. There are two other schools of thought to be explained, the reflection theory and the illusion theory. So I explain in the next class. Yes, there is one classic episode in the life of Buddha. But you have to remember, all people are not Buddhas. So at the beginning, when you interact with criminals, we have to slowly bring their mind to a higher and higher level of understanding. So because this unity of the macrocosm and microcosm, the entire existence, may not be even intellectually easy for them to understand. It may be far beyond them to understand. So for such people, we have to begin with ideas like the humanity is one. So if we hurt others, we are hurting ourselves. We become, my mental peace is lost. Such ideas only will be all right when you discuss with people of that type. But I can give an example that is in the Buddha's life. Buddha was an enlightened person. So one day he was walking through the forest, and there was a robber living in that area. His name is Angulimala. And the meaning is, his hobby was catching people, robbing them, murdering them, taking all their possessions, and then cutting off their fingers and making garland of those fingers and wearing. That was his main hobby. Now, it so happened that in Buddha's life, when he was walking through that path, some wayfarers or other common people told him, please don't take this path, it is dangerous. Here is an evil man staying, a cruel man staying. Buddha didn't listen. But as he went on, this man suddenly thought, well, here is somebody, I'll get at least 10 fingers, So as he tried to approach Buddha, Buddha continued walking slowly, but Angulimala could not catch up with him. That's how the story goes. The story has got something behind this, and a higher idea behind that should be understood seriously. And after some time, Buddha just turned back. When this man saw Buddha's face, he felt, here is a man who was not afraid of me and who doesn't hate me. Because in all previous cases, whenever he tried to approach wayfarers, they either fled in fear or they were full of hatred. But suddenly it had a transforming effect on this robber's mind, and he became a great Buddhist monk. Later, when he grew old, he went back to the place where he was engaged in robbing and killing, and people thought the old murderer has returned, and they threw stones at him, and they tried to kill him, but he did not react. Then he died very peacefully without any. Say one example, but here there is another rejoinder, another aspect to this man's life. This person was brought up as a very God-fearing child in a good family. His parents had brought him up as a role model of a son, a young man. He had some unpleasant experience in his life. Somebody did a great injustice to him, and he had to leave the place. According to some historians, this happened in his teacher's home. We do not know. Anyhow, whatever it may be, he fled that place, and in revenge, he became a murderer and a robber. So when he saw Buddha, immediately the old memories rushed back to his mind, and there was a transformation in his life. So this is one example. But as I said earlier, all people are not Buddhas. So when we discuss with people of different types, we should not hate them. And there are some people, we should not try to transform them till we have become Buddhas. Otherwise, there is a lot of risk. They may transform us. It could happen. So before we have reached the highest level of spiritual enlightenment, we should not try to convert other people. They may try to convert us to their line of life. So, but we should not hate anyone. We should try to be friendly, try to help. But we should never hate anyone. This theory of this doctrine of universal oneness of existence has got one advantage. Anyone could practice. We won't hate anyone from the depth of our heart or do injury to anyone. That tendency can be completely avoided if one tries to practice this basic idea and keep this idea in some corner of our mind, that the existence is one, unity is one, creation is one, humanity is one. This doctrine could be practiced by anyone. It could be used to root out intense hatred, hostility, or negative feelings towards other fellow beings. That's one advantage. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tatsat Sri Ramakrishna Namastu. Om Peace Peace Peace.